What if the first Avenger never took his final journey? What if Steve Rogers didn't whisper goodbye to a life unlived, but hello to a future unwritten? Imagine a world where the shield never passed hands in surrender, but in trust. Where the super soldier didn't fade into memory but stood firm in the present. A world where Captain America's greatest battle wasn't against Hydra or Thanos, but against the weight of forever. This isn't the story of "I can do this all day." This is the story of "I will do this every day." This isn't about going back. This is about moving forward. This is Steve Rogers' second act. Let's explore the timeline that refused to close. The compound was quiet that day. Too quiet. Tony was gone. Natasha was gone. The universe was saved, but the cost had carved hollows in every surviving heart. Steve Rogers stood at the platform, the quantum tunnel humming with possibility. In his weathered hands, he held the case. 6 Infinity Stones waiting to be returned to their proper timelines. One final mission. One last duty.
Ready, Cap?
Bruce Banner called from the control panel. Steve looked at the shield strapped to his arm. The vibranium caught the light, reflecting not just his image but his history. Every battle, every loss, every choice that had led him here. In another timeline, he would have nodded, stepped onto that platform, vanished into the past to claim a dance he'd been promised 70 years ago. But in this world, Steve Rogers looked up and said something different.
Actually, Bruce, I think I need to make a different choice.
Sam Wilson stepped forward, confusion creasing his brow.
Steve, what are you talking about?
Steve set the case down. Not with hesitation, with certainty.
I've spent my entire life living in the past, fighting yesterday's war, mourning yesterday's losses. But maybe it's time I tried living in tomorrow.
He looked at Sam, at Bucky, at the family he'd built in this strange, broken century.
The stones still need to be returned, but I'm not the only one who can do it.
Steve.
Bucky started.
No, Buck. I've made my choice. For once in my life, I'm choosing to stay.
And with those words, Steve Rogers didn't just reject the past. He embraced an uncertain future. The platform powered down. The case remained unopened. And somewhere in the quantum realm, a dance waited forever for a partner who would never come. But Steve Rogers finally learned to dance in his own time. Who was Steve Rogers when he wasn't needed? For 70 years, that question had never mattered. First as a scrawny kid from Brooklyn, fighting bullies in back alleys. Then as Captain America, symbol of hope and freedom. Then as a man out of time, fighting tomorrow's wars with yesterday's values. Purpose had always found him, wrapped in duty and destiny. Now, he had to find it himself. He bought a small apartment in Brooklyn, not the penthouse Stark had offered. Just a simple place with windows that faced the sunrise and a fire escape that creaked like the old days. For the first time in decades, Steve Rogers had to learn how to be ordinary. He learned to grocery shop without a list, wandering aisles and discovering foods that hadn't existed in the 1940s. To cook meals for one, standing in a kitchen that echoed with unfamiliar silence. To sit in quiet without scanning for threats, without waiting for alarms to sound. It was harder than any battle he'd ever fought. The nightmares came frequently at first. Not of war or aliens, but of emptiness. Of waking up with nothing to do, nowhere to be needed, no one to save. Some mornings he'd reach for his shield before remembering it belonged to someone else now. But Steve Rogers had never backed down from a fight, even when the enemy was himself. 3 months after the choice, Sam Wilson found Steve sitting on a bench in Prospect Park, sketching the skyline.
You know, when you gave me the shield, I thought you were crazy.
Sam said, settling beside him.
Yeah? Why's that?
Steve looked up, pencil paused mid-stroke.
Because I thought you were running away.
Steve smiled, the first real smile Sam had seen in months. Sam studied his friend's face. The lines were deeper now, carved by more than just age. But there was something else there too. Something that hadn't been there before. Peace.
So what now?
Sam asked. Steve closed his sketchbook.
Now I figure out how to be Steve Rogers, not Captain America. Just Steve.
And if the world needs Captain America again?
Then it's got you. And you're better at this job than you know.
Steve's hand moved instinctively to where his shield would rest. But it wasn't there anymore. It was with Sam, where it belonged.
You don't carry the shield because you're trying to be me. You carry it because you're trying to be you. That's what makes you Captain America.
Steve looked out at the park, at the families playing, the couples walking, the ordinary miracle of a Tuesday afternoon in Brooklyn. But freedom isn't the absence of ghosts. It's learning to live with them. Steve still woke up some mornings expecting to see Tony Stark tinkering with coffee machines. 6 months in, Steve discovered something unexpected. He was good at being ordinary. He volunteered at the VA, not as a symbol, but as someone who understood what it meant to wake up in a world that had moved on without you. He sat with veterans who'd lost limbs, purpose, hope. He didn't offer platitudes. He just listened.
The thing about war is that everyone expects you to come home the same person who left. But you can't. And that's not failing. That's surviving.
He told Marcus, a young soldier who'd lost his leg in Afghanistan.
How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything feels broken?
Marcus looked up from his prosthetic, eyes hollow. Steve thought about Peggy, about the dance he'd never claimed, about the life he'd chosen to leave behind.
You find new reasons to get up in the morning. Not better reasons. Not bigger reasons. Just new ones.
He started teaching art classes for neighborhood kids, not because he was famous, but because he remembered what it felt like to see the world as something that could be drawn, captured, made beautiful.
Mr. Steve, why do you draw sad things sometimes?
8-year-old Maria asked one day. Steve looked at his latest sketch, a portrait of Tony, captured in one of those rare, unguarded moments.
Because sad things are still beautiful. And beautiful things deserve to be remembered,
he said gently. It started with coffee at Sarah Chen's bookstore cafe on the corner of Steve Street. She was in her 40s, divorced, with 2 teenage kids, and absolutely no patience for celebrity nonsense.
You're that Captain America guy, right?
She said the first time he walked in.
Former Captain America guy.
Steve corrected.
Good. The current one seems nice, but you looked like you had a stick up your ass.
Steve laughed.
I probably did.
Actually laughed.
Well, as long as you don't bleed patriotism on my books, you're welcome here.
It became his routine. Morning coffee before art class, evening tea after volunteering, weekend conversations about books and life, and the particular challenge of raising teenagers in a world where half the population had been dusted for 5 years. Sarah didn't treat him like a hero. She treated him like a customer, who left good tips and occasionally helped her move heavy boxes.
You know what your problem is?
She said one evening as Steve helped her close up shop.
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
You think being normal is settling? Like you're supposed to be saving the world every Tuesday, or you're wasting your time.
Steve paused, a stack of books halfway to the shelf.
Aren't I?
The first time he kissed her, it was behind the poetry section on a rainy Thursday evening. It wasn't cinematic. It was just 2 people choosing each other in the quiet space between one breath and the next.
No regrets?
She whispered afterward. Steve thought about Peggy, about promises made and paths not taken. But looking at Sarah, brilliant, fierce, unimpressed Sarah, he realized something had shifted.
Only one. That I waited so long to start living.
He said. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you're trying to leave it behind. The call came at 3 a.m. Sam's voice, tight with tension.
Steve, we need you.
What's happening?
Zemo is back. He's got the Winter Soldier program files. All of them.
Steve's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the terrible hunger of purpose, the addiction to being needed that he thought he'd conquered. The mission was clean, efficient. Steve moved through it like a ghost, remembering how to be solid. No shield, no uniform, just practical gear and 70 years of experience. But something was different this time. He didn't lead from the front. He supported, advised. Let Sam call the plays while he watched the new Captain America become everything Steve had hoped he could be. When it was over, Sam found Steve sitting on the Quinjet's ramp, looking out at the sunrise.
Steve, you okay?
Yeah, I am.
Steve said, and meant it.
You were different out there. Good different.
Steve nodded slowly.
I used to fight because I couldn't stand by and watch bad things happen. Tonight I fought because I chose to. There's a difference.
What kind of difference?
The kind that lets you go home.
2 years after the choice, Steve Rogers was unrecognizable as the man who'd stood frozen at the quantum platform. He'd gained weight, the settled kind that comes from regular meals and peaceful sleep. His hair was longer, touched with more gray. He wore glasses for reading now, something that would have been impossible with the serum, but seemed to be happening as his enhanced biology gradually returned to baseline.
The serum was never permanent. Without the constant stress of battle, your body is returning to enhanced human rather than superhuman.
Dr. Cho had explained. Steve found he didn't mind. Being slightly stronger than average instead of impossibly strong felt more like being human. Sarah noticed the changes too.
You look lighter. Like you're not carrying the world on your shoulders anymore.
She said one evening as they walked through Brooklyn Heights.
Someone else is carrying it now, and doing a better job than I ever did.
They stopped at the promenade, looking out over the water. The city sparkled across the river. 10 million lights representing 10 million lives Steve Rogers no longer felt responsible for.
Do you miss it? The importance? The certainty?
I miss the simplicity, but I don't miss the weight. I was never supposed to carry it forever.
He said finally. Steve took her hand, fingers intertwining. Not the hand of Captain America, but just the hand of Steve Rogers, man from Brooklyn, finally learning to live in the time he'd been given.
Now I get to find out what comes next.
The wedding was small, just Steve and Sarah, their immediate families, and a handful of close friends gathered in the bookstore's back garden. No press, no photographers, no speeches about symbols and legacies. Just two people who'd found each other in the space between who they used to be and who they were becoming. Sam officiated, the shield conspicuously absent, replaced by a smile that could have powered the city.
Do you, Steve Rogers, take Sarah Chen to be your wife?
Steve looked at Sarah, really looked at her. Not through the filter of duty or destiny, but just a man looking at the woman he'd chosen to love.
I do.
Do you, Sarah Chen, take Steve Rogers to be your husband?
Sarah's eyes sparkled with humor and affection, and the kind of love that doesn't need saving the world to prove itself.
I do, even if he does still leave his shield polishing cloth on the bathroom counter.
I don't have a shield anymore.
Old habits die hard, Rogers.
The laughter was warm, genuine. The sound of a life being lived instead of a legend being written. When they kissed, it wasn't cinematic. It was just two people choosing each other, again and again, in the endless succession of small moments that make up a marriage. Later, as they danced, Sarah whispered.
No regrets?
Steve thought about Peggy, about the dance he'd never claimed, about the life he'd imagined in those long nights frozen in ice.
Only one, that I waited so long to start living.
He said. 5 years later, Steve Rogers was completely, utterly ordinary. He ran a small art studio in Brooklyn, teaching anyone who wanted to learn. He coached Little League on weekends, terribly, but with enthusiasm. He and Sarah had adopted 2 kids from the system, siblings who'd been separated during the blip and reunited after the return. Maria and David Chen Rogers, who called him Steve Dad and thought his most impressive superpower was making pancakes shaped like their initials.
Steve, Dad, why don't you have any pictures of yourself being Captain America?
Maria asked one Saturday morning.
Do you have pictures of yourself being 10 years old?
That's different. I'm still 10.
And I'm still me. I just do different things now.
But weren't you famous?
I was. But famous isn't the same as important.
David looked up from his homework.
Are you important now?
Steve looked around the kitchen. Sarah grading papers, Maria with syrup in her hair, David struggling with math but too proud to ask for help.
I'm important to you guys. That's enough.
What about saving the world?
Someone else is doing that now, and doing it better than I ever did.
But what if they need you?
Then I'll help, but I won't be Captain America. I'll just be me. And sometimes that's exactly what people need.
The call came on a Tuesday. Not a crisis, just a voice from beyond.
Hey, Capsicle. Miss me?
Tony? Is that you?
Recorded message, genius. If you're hearing this, it means my daughter's getting married and I'm still dead, which is unfortunate for multiple reasons.
Steve sat down heavily, surrounded by half-finished portraits and the comfortable chaos of a life being lived.
Listen, I need a favor. Morgan's getting married next month, and she asked me to walk her down the aisle. Problem is, I's dead. Makes it tricky to show up at weddings.
Steve closed his eyes, feeling the familiar tug of responsibility. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an honor.
I'm asking you to be there, not as Captain America, just as the guy who knew her father.
When's the wedding?
June 15th. And Steve, bring Sarah, bring the kids. This isn't about being a symbol, it's about being family.
The wedding was everything Tony would have loved. Elegant but not stuffy. Perfectly imperfect in the way that only real love can be. Steve stood at the front of the church, watching Morgan Stark walk down the aisle. She looked so much like Tony. Brilliant eyes, confident smile. The kind of presence that made you believe anything was possible. When she reached the altar, she stopped in front of Steve.
He would have made a terrible speech, wouldn't he?
Absolutely awful. Probably would have included statistics about marriage success rates.
Steve agreed.
And at least 3 pop culture references I wouldn't understand. Thank you for being here, for remembering him the way he really was.
Morgan laughed, tears sparkling in her eyes.
Thank you for letting me.
When it came time for the father of the bride's speech, Steve spoke not as a symbol, but as family.
Tony Stark was many things. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. But most importantly, he was a father. And the greatest gift he ever gave the world wasn't arc reactor technology. It was you, Morgan. You are his legacy. Not because you're like him, but because you're better than him.
He paused, thinking about all the battles they'd fought, all the ways they'd failed and succeeded together.
Tony used to say that part of the journey is the end. But I think he was wrong. The journey doesn't end. It just gets passed on to the people we love.
The applause was gentle, warm, and Steve felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. 10 years after the choice, Steve Rogers sat in his backyard, watching his grandchildren chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Sarah was beside him, her hair silver now, her hand still fitting perfectly in his. The years had been kind to them, marked by the accumulation of small kindnesses, daily choices, ordinary love.
Any regrets?
Only one.
Steve said, as he always did. Usually he said he regretted waiting so long to start living. But tonight, watching the children play and feeling the weight of a life well lived, something different came out.
I regret that it took me so long to understand what Peggy meant.
What did she mean?
She told me once that the world would always need Captain America, but she never said it had to be me.
Do you think she was right?
Steve watched his grandson try to catch a firefly, laughing as it danced just out of reach.
I think she understood something I didn't. That being a hero isn't about being indispensable. It's about being willing to become dispensable. To build something so strong that it doesn't need you to survive.
And did you build something that strong?
Steve smiled, thinking about Sam with the shield, about the Avengers still protecting the world, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things every day, about his students painting their first masterpieces, about Morgan Stark changing the world one innovation at a time. A firefly landed on his arm, glowing softly in the darkness. Steve watched it for a moment, then gently lifted his hand, setting it free.
The light's still there. It just doesn't need me to carry it anymore.
He murmured. Sarah squeezed his hand.
So what now?
Now we watch the light spread.
And if the world needs Captain America again?
Then it will find him. It always does.
Steve Rogers leaned back in his chair, finally understanding that the greatest adventure isn't saving the world, it's learning to live in it. This is the story of the choice that saved not just Steve Rogers, but the idea that heroes don't have to be martyrs. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't sacrifice yourself for tomorrow. It's choosing to see if tomorrow can be beautiful. This is the story of Captain America's greatest victory, learning that the shield was never his to carry forever. It was his to pass on. And in letting go, he finally learned to hold on to what mattered most, not the world, but his place in it, as Steve Rogers, the man who chose to stay. If you want more what-if scenarios, then don't forget to subscribe and see you in the next one.